And now that that's going, I would like to introduce you all to today's speaker, Dave Kropko. If you don't already know Dave, he's our Vice President of Engineering. He's been a senior member of our team for over 15 years. He leads our engineering staff and really works with clients in a sort of a senior advisory role on consulting and project engagements. Dave's seen a lot, and I think what really adds to this conversation is that Dave is able to speak to these issues not only from a technical perspective, but really from an executive perspective. And that's really the focus for today, is we want to prep you with that there's bigger issues afoot here with IT security. And I think you'll really enjoy sort of his straightforward style. So Dave, with that, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, hello, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time and joining us today. And like Parker said, what we're going to try to do today, and what we've really been trying to accomplish with this webinar series, is to challenge our customers to think about security in a little bit of a different way. So like many times when we go in, we're sitting in with a client, we immediately go down into a discussion about what the products are and what solution are we trying to provide or what problem are we trying to solve. And we focus on product level issues related to security. But then we forget that in today's world, security for organizations really needs to be looked at differently than just simply what is the implementation of a solution going to look like. It's a comprehensive view. And so what we're hoping to bring to this discussion is a focus on some of the non-technical product issues that companies need to consider when they're discussing how their organization is going to address IT security. And we want to make you guys aware of some of the other areas that you should be focusing on instead of actually the very specific technologies, which are still obviously very important. But developing an overall strategy on how your organization is going to look at security, it's important that you understand there's more to it than just IT. It's not just IT's responsibility. It's a business decision that needs to be made from the C-level all the way on down. And again, what we tend to see is it's very reactionary in the world of security. And in some cases, it's always going to be very reactionary in the world of security because something happens that nobody, felt like was going to happen, and it did. And now everybody's scrambling to try to figure out, well, how do we recover? But what's important for organizations to consider now is, do you have the proper reasonable things in place that help prevent and mitigate what happens if, and in many cases when, you run across a cyber breach? So we also see a lot of the, hey, we're too small. We don't really think it's a big deal for us. We don't really have anything of value. But if you're paying attention to the news now and you're seeing what's going on, I think you realize that cyber threats are for companies of any size. And they're very detrimental. We have statistics that say that more than 20% of small and medium businesses have been victims of cyber attacks, and that number is growing by 15% or more a year. For the purposes of that discussion, think of small company as less than 500. Cisco just released a study that reported over 1,800 respondents from small businesses, and these were businesses under 500 people. 40 of them responded that there was an actual breach, and they also responded that it took them more than a day of full business to recover. So the numbers are beginning to escalate regardless of what you may or may not have in place. And so that's kind of some of the stuff that we want to talk to you about today, is the things that you need to be considering when you're talking about a complete approach to IT security. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we're seeing. We're going to talk about one of the key areas that we think is extremely important, and that's employee awareness. The more that we talk through this presentation, hopefully the more you'll be aware that this is something that needs to be addressed inside of every organization based on what we're seeing in the market and how things are happening. And then obviously the idea is that you have, as an organization, a security best practices for whether it's a very formal document or somewhat of an informal document, that you have something in place that addresses how you handle it, when you handle it, and things of that nature. We'll talk about that at the end, and we'll talk about what some of the best practices we feel need to be included in an environment, or excuse me, in a document like that. So, and then at the end, of course, we'll talk, we'll open it up for Q&A, and we'll talk about some next steps, and Parker will jump back in on that part. So let's talk a little bit about insurance. It's one of the things that some organizations aren't really having conversations about, but it's really important. It's called cyber liability insurance coverage, and it's an emerging market inside of insurance companies right now. And what we're speaking of there is really understanding what your risk is, and then being able to have a policy that helps mitigate or transfer that risk in the event of a breach or the need to recover. These policies are really intended to help you mitigate your exposure by offsetting the cost of a recovery. And that offset of cost of recovery could be multiple things. I mean, one of the things it could mean is third-party lawsuits, depending on the type of organization you are and what might be out there. So understanding, though, that there is a difference between the litigation and also that part of this is getting back up and running, because the costs to those two things can be very different. The recovery from an attack can be extremely time-consuming, not just expensive. And in our experience, we've helped multiple companies recover from these type of events, and we've seen anything from days to weeks of downtime. And trying to understand the costs associated with that, in some cases, is extremely difficult. But one of the things that we've seen also is that the National Security Alliance released a statistic that said 60% of small businesses that fall victim to an attack are out of business within 6 months. These insurance policies and these coverages are in place to help that number, so that organizations have the means to fall back on the insurance companies to talk about what kind of help they can provide. But it also opens up another area of consideration, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you're going to have to be able to have a very honest conversation with your insurance company about, hey, this is my risk and this is my exposure. And that's where experts can come in and help you determine that, whether it relates to the amount of time it takes to restore, or equipment loss, or employee downtime. Those are the things that companies like ALI can bring to the table when we're talking to you about the things that you need to be considering. Forecasted premiums, according to Forbes, are to be $7.5 billion by 2020, and this is small business premium. We're not talking about companies like Amazon and Microsoft and RSA and those big guys out there. That Forbes is forecasting that this will be a $7.5 billion industry by 2020. Not for me to say anything against Forbes. They know a heck of a lot more than I do. I think it's going to hit there before 2020. It's becoming something that just a tremendous amount of organizations are interested in seeing. And companies need to understand, when they're buying these premiums, what cleanup really means. So we're talking about the fact that you're going to need to have an investigation. There's probably going to be some sort of forensic investigation into the organization. What happened? How did it happen? How do we make sure that we don't do it again? What is your business loss impact? And that can be multiple things. That's the actual cost of recovery and downtime. It's also a public relation issue. If you're offering the same product as the guy across the street and you get hacked and he doesn't, there's a chance that you could potentially lose business. It could get even further than that. It could get law enforcement involved, and there could be a consumer confidence issue. So it becomes something that companies really need to understand and be able to put dollar amounts around, at least ballpark figures, so that they can have these honest in companies. We worked with a company not too long ago that had called us in and asked us to help them. And they had a situation, they reached out, and we went in, and they had been compromised. And we were able to get them functional in a relatively short period of time. But when we had more conversations with them, they indicated to us that they were less concerned, not that they didn't get compromised, but the fact that they had already talked to their insurance company, and they were very easily able to explain to them, this is how much we lose a day. So if we're down for a day, it's $50,000. And if we're down for half a day, it's this. And what they guarantee their customers and having their ability to ship. So it was really interesting to see that they took the steps to help gather that information so that their insurance company policy matched up really well with what their needs are. A lot of companies that we talk to, they just don't have this because it's not something they've been made to think about. So it needs to just be part of your overall risk management strategy. When we talk about a security document, one of the things would be risk management, and this would be it. And the other thing to consider too is, in some cases, we've worked with some firms that they hadn't considered what their liability insurance was, but their business partner sure had. And so it was hey, if you're going to do business with us, you're going to need to go get one of these, and we're going to need to review it and understand what your coverages are. So it just becomes really, again, part of that thought process. So one of the things that you need to be considering and keep in mind is that insurance is evolving as far as the coverages are concerned, and the risk changes frequently. The breaches are happening all the time. So the conversation with your insurance company needs to be something that you probably keep as ongoing, making sure that you continue to have adequate coverage. And remember, a cyber attack affects everybody. It doesn't just affect the IT department. So what we're going to talk about here in considerations, what should you be thinking about? What are some of the things that you can do when you evaluate a comprehensive security approach? The first is bring an expert to help. And what this expert should be doing is looking at reviewing best practices, helping with employee education, making sure proper protections and reasonable protections are in place and that they're being managed properly, helping you to develop that comprehensive approach to an entire security package. And remember, this has value just as if you were to hire another business consultant to come in on an area that you're not experts on. This is what we do. So one of the components that ALI does is we have the experts that can come in that stay abreast of this type of technology, and we can help in that regard. And there's business value in saying, hey, you know what, we need to bring somebody in. We need to have them take a look at what we've got going on here, just to make sure that we've got reasonable protections in place. And what you may find is you're going to be obligated to do things like this because of business partnerships you already have. So again, what's reasonable? What should we be protecting when we're talking about protecting data? The reason I bring this up is because some of the things that we've seen, go in, have a conversation. Hey, have you heard about this product? Well, yeah, we know about that product, but we think this product might do it better. And then conversations go on internally as well as with a business partner, and things get deployed and they get put out on the network, and it can be very expensive. Seems like it's a good use of money because it advertises that, hey, it'll protect you against this, we'll protect you against that. If you get, you won't get hit with this virus. And so you start putting all of these things out there. You spend a whole lot of money. And if you're not careful, you can have multiple products that stretch your staff and unfortunately don't provide a cohesive solution to management. So the first thing that we try to do is work with clients to see if there's an actual policy or plan in place and what it should look like. And again, we'll get to that a little bit later. But those are some of the things that you need to be thinking about is what's reasonable, because you can spend an entire amount of money on a solution that promises the world and really doesn't deliver a whole lot, and it'll give you a false sense of security moving forward. Identifications of system and data is important. It's for organizations really to understand, what do you have? Where's it contained? How does it function? Obviously many companies now have a hybrid setup where some data is on-prem, some data is in the cloud, and being able to understand how that data is stored, how it's accessed, how it's being backed up, how it's capable of being restored, become really important. And so again, part of your overall approach is probably going to be to have a discussion with a third-party vendor that could potentially be hosting your data in their cloud. And the last, which is becoming more and more important, is to build awareness. So one of the most important things that companies can do now is to make sure their employees are aware of the risks and how these risks are exploited. And what we see is that most attacks aren't brute force. They're coming in social engineering, or another way to put it is front door attack. Small business here in Virginia recently suffered a very serious breach. It started with nothing more than a single email, came into an employee. The employee looked at it. It looked completely legit. It got through their spam filters. They had reasonable protections in place. Employee clicked on the malicious link, and before you know it, it had started spreading and ran over the course of a weekend, and actually came back a second time through another similar type of attack, to where, again, employee just innocently clicked on a link and it was over again. The malware spread. It found access to systems that had access to other systems, and by the time it was done, it was over a $2 million loss. Not a large company, and regional. So it's not just things that you see that happen in DC or New York or Houston. It happens everywhere, and costs can be staggering, and they accumulate very quickly. Even if you have reasonable protections in place, sometimes you're going to wind up having to deal with that. So employee awareness becomes something that's really important. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I've got a couple statistics for you to take a look at, but we really do feel that it's important for organizations to look beyond the typical. So the firewall, yes, we understand that. And whether your cloud security and your operational security and OS, we also think that something that clients are needing to look at more is endpoint protection. And this ties directly into the building of the awareness with the employees. Remember, when we're not talking about just desktops and laptops when we say endpoints. We are talking about smartphones, iPhones, Surface Pros, Android devices, really any BYOD device that you're allowing access to your corporate network is something that organizations need to be considering. What are they doing? A couple statistics for you to think about as it relates to endpoint security. In 2017, 92% of malware was delivered via email. And 76% of organizations reported said they have experienced some sort of phishing attack. And of those folks, 48 said the rate of attacks is increasing. In 2017, 75% of malware was delivered via an email attachment. So what did companies start doing? They just start telling their people, hey, don't click on files you don't know anything about. You get an email from somebody you don't know, don't click on the file, don't download it. You'll be good. They started putting protections in there. The anti-spam stuff started getting better. So what did they do in 2018? In 2018, so far, studies are showing that emails with nothing more than a malicious link are outnumbering attachments by 4 to 1. So now it's, again, challenging the spam filters, challenging the things that are in place, but the tactic is changing, and your end user shows up with an email that says, hey, I think one of the ones I read about today was somebody received an email that simply said, your account has been compromised. Please click and log in here to reset your username and password. Looked completely legit. It was a company that she did business with, and she clicked on it. And the article didn't go into what happened after that. It was just an example of how quickly something like that could happen. I think you guys have seen it too. I mean, I've gotten the ones from Wells Fargo. I've gotten the ones that says, my Amazon account has been used in Tunisia, and, somebody bought a pair of sneakers and you need to go out and change your username and password as quickly as you possibly can. And they spell Amazon with an S in their link. So those are the things that employees, however, need to be trained on, because part of the reason that phishing and malware and ransomware attacks are on the increase is it's providing access to the most vulnerable part of any network, and that's your people. So a couple more things to think about. Whoops, went the wrong way. 90% of cybersecurity issues originate from human error. So not external, it's coming from inside. And what's scary for the companies that we talk to is a lot of them don't have the tools or the training to be able to figure out where did it start and where did it go. And when you start talking about a comprehensive solution to security and you start talking about endpoint management or mobile device management, those are the conversations you're going to start to have about a centralized way to control the endpoints to mitigate human error. It's always going to happen, but there's still an awareness, and then there's still a technology play that can be put together to help mitigate that problem. 50% of small and medium businesses has experienced at least one cyber breach. I could probably go out and find numbers that will be higher than that or lower than that, but even that number in and of itself should let you know that this isn't a large business problem. It's an everybody problem. And just think about how many companies don't report. I don't know if you guys saw the news. I got an article last night that Uber was fined, I think it was like $147 million because they covered it up. They didn't want anybody to know. They actually paid hackers to make sure that they didn't disclose that they'd been hacked. So there are probably a lot of small companies out there that got compromised that aren't under any reporting requirements, that just don't. And they just kind of quietly go about trying to fix it. But that number's fairly significant, and it's only going to get higher. And then this 55% of all email is spam. Even with the best of spam filters, stuff gets through all the time. So if you think about the volume of mail that you get, and 55% of it is junk, and it's still getting through into your inbox, the threat or the ability for the threat to increase of things getting in goes higher every time that number goes up. Symantec did a study in 2018. It was a security threat report. And what their data showed was that the average user receives 16 malicious spam emails a month. Now, these are the ones that are getting through. 16 malicious spam emails per month. Do a little bit of math on that in your head. Multiply that by the number of employees you have in your organization. If you've got 20 employees, that's 320 times a month. You've got to trust that they're going to make the right decision and not click on something that shouldn't be clicked on, regardless of how legitimate it looks. You know, we can build the most expensive, secure facility in the world, but if somebody opens the front door, it really doesn't matter. And right now, that's the front door. It's going after the people, the employees, the endpoints. And so it means that these type of attacks should be treated seriously, and it should be handled properly inside of the organization by making sure you're training your people. You know, those mock phishing attacks, they only go so far. It's just no one's perfect, and these attacks can be really well disguised. So eventually, something's going to slip up, and when it does, you need to have a plan in place on how you're going to react to it. So one of the things that this should tie back to in your mind is when you're starting to think about an endpoint management strategy or security as part of the overall, is that making sure that you're thinking about mobile device management as well. So don't just let yourself think about desktops and laptops. These are all the other devices that can connect to your network that your employees are either given or they're bringing their own. And you need to look at that when you're taking an entire approach. So we keep talking about it, but one of the things that I think, and in wrapping up, one of the things that I think companies need to be looking at is what is involved. We kind of covered this employee education and phishing and malware, but really what is more involved in a security assessment, and what are the things that you should be looking at? This list isn't meant to be comprehensive, and I'll go through it very quickly, and it's something that we obviously would be very interested in talking to you about. But components of a security assessment, acceptable use is huge. You're telling your employees there, how are they allowed to use your stuff? What are the requirements? How do they use the internet? How do they use social media? How do they use instant messaging? All of those things go into an acceptable use. And typically we recommend that employers make their employees sign it, that they understand it. Part of the other area of an acceptable use policy is that what do employees supposed to do if they click on a bad link? How are they supposed to report it? And what are the proper channels for that to happen? Data and backup systems obviously is a key. You need to understand what your backup policy is. What platform are you using? Do you verify restores? That's huge. We worked with a company a few years ago that called us in to help us out, help them out, and they had gotten attacked. And we went directly to their backup. It didn't take us long to figure out that this was going to be something we were going to have to restore. They hadn't done any test restores. And when we went and tried to do restores from the backups that they were doing every day, we found out that there was configuration issues that had been done previously that prevented a proper type of restore that they needed. They were down for 2 weeks in some way, shape, or form. And it was in their busiest of seasons. So they're getting ready to ship a whole bunch of product out, and it was their busiest quarter of the year, and they couldn't get anything up and running. They had been compromised. and they had never bothered to even test to see if they could restore the backups that they spent all that time backing up. So it's important to understand, can you restore? What are your retention policies? Do you have any third-party requirements for retention policies? Are you doing off-site backup? ALI offers a product called FlexCloud where we can allow you to back up your data securely in our data center off-site as an option or as part of your overall backup solution. In some cases, companies are required to have that. So we have the ability to sit down with you and talk through data systems, your backups, what your possibilities are, what your options are. Email, huge. That's a big area of security assessment. Talking about there is how you're going to handle it. What information are you going to allow your employees to use? Are employees allowed to use it for personal use? Do you separate out private email versus corporate email? How do you handle file attachments? So those are areas that get addressed. Who can access what? Very important. One of the reasons some of these hacks get out of control is because they find that they can get to a machine that has access to information that the user actually never needed, but can really lead to a larger exploit. So we talk about what your rules are there. Incident response kind of highlighted that a little bit. What are you going to do? I mean, the plan is, look, it's going to happen. So what are we going to do? Who's in charge? Who's responsible? Who's doing what? And how are we doing it? And so that becomes part of a component. We talked about mobile device management, huge area that needs to be considered. You think you wouldn't need to bring passwords up, but you do. Strong passwords, periodic changes, making sure people are having to use capital letters, numbers, and symbols, not just logging in with the word password. Something that some companies don't consider a whole lot of is physical security. Very important. Who can access your building? Who can access your wiring closets, server rooms, file rooms? Do I know who is in my building and what they're doing? Can they come in there and start flipping off power switches? Those are things. Badged access, being able to make sure that you know who is where and they can only get where they need to be. Something companies are struggling with today. VPN and remote, again, access, who and where. And then something also to consider is wireless. So we will have an upcoming webinar on wireless access security and some of the things that you can do there. But sometimes just having a guest account isn't enough. And so there are certain things that companies need to be considering. And when we talk to them about having a security assessment, that's one of the areas that we investigate. And as mentioned before, of course, employee training. So I think well, maybe I haven't, I'm not sure. I will open it up for Q&A now, and then Parker will pick up on next steps.